So if you think that all this is going on in these gigantic fields of gravity and light with you in mind, then you really do have a self-centeredness problem. You might put it another way. I have tried to put it another way. I'll try it on you. Our first speaker tonight said that his people have been around for 100,000 years that we know about. That's certainly true. There is a difference of opinion about how long our species in general has been on the planet. It's a flash of a second in evolutionary time. Richard Dawkins thinks it might be as long as 250,000 years. Look, you make it 250,000. Francis Collins, the man who did the DNA decoding, the Human Genome Project, who's, by the way, another Christian scientist, or rather, a scientist who is a Christian. I won't make that mistake again. You know what Mark Twain said about the work of Mary Baker Eddy, the Christian Science writer, founder of it, her books? Chloroform in print, he said. This is a digression. It's a digression. Francis Collins says at least 100,000 years. We can show we've been around for that long. It's quite a long time. I'll take 100. Never mind. I don't need 250,000 for my point. Make it 100,000. 100,000 years, people have been, our species has been around on this speck. Born, usually dying. Actually, a great number of them in childbirth wouldn't have got beyond being born. For the first 80 or so, 90 or so thousand years, nearly 100, not living more than 25 to 30 years at the most, then probably dying of their teeth, if they were lucky, or of the other needless mammalian things that show us that we bear the stamp, as Darwin put it, of our lowly origin, the appendix we don't need anymore, innumerable other shortcomings of our design. We're designed to live on the savanna that we've escaped from. Terrible disease, suffering, misery, malnutrition, and fear. Where do the earthquakes come from? Why is there an eclipse? What are the shooting stars doing? And awful cults of sacrifice to try and ward off what are in fact natural events. And war, and rape, and the kidnap of other peoples and the enslavement of them. All of this goes on, gradually inching up to the point where you can brew beer, a breakthrough in my view, domesticate animals, separate one kind of corn from another. So very millimetrical progress, but terrible struggle, sacrifice, pain, misery, and above all, fear and ignorance. And you have to believe this if you believe in monotheism. For the first 97, 98,000 of this, heaven watches with indifference. Oh, there they go again. That whole civilization's just died out. Well, what are you going to do? They're raping each other again. They're poisoning. They think that the other tribe has poisoned the well, so they're going to kill all their children. All this. Just watch all that. 3,000 years ago at the most, it's decided, no, we've got to intervene now. You have to believe it. You have to believe it. And the revelation must be personal, must appear. So we'll pick the most backward, the most barbaric, the most illiterate, the most superstitious, and the most savage people we can find in the most stony area of the world. We won't appear to the Chinese, who can already read. We won't appear in the Indus Valley, where they know a thing or two and they're already, they're very far advanced. No. We'll appear to this brutal, enslaved, hopeless, superstitious crowd, and we'll force them to cut their way through all of their neighbors with slaughter, genocide, and racism, and settle on the only part of the Middle East where there's no oil. And all subsequent revelations occur in the same district. And without this, we wouldn't know right from wrong. Now, ladies and gentlemen, comrades and friends, brothers and sisters, I know I'm capable of parody and at my lowest of sarcasm, and I've proved it to you, and sometimes I've got paid for it. But in seriousness now, do I seriously misrepresent the situation? You must believe something like that happened, or did not, in order to address the whole question of where monotheism comes from. I would say it can't be proved that that isn't how we came to understand the morality and the need for it, but I would regard it in the light of the other evidence I've touched upon as being in the very highest degree improbable, that that is the way we discovered how to think, how to decide how to live with one another, what our duties are to each other, and so forth. And I submit it to you in all, no, I'm not going to say humility. I just submit it to you, okay? And again, if this was the plan, was it made by someone who likes us? Well, that's another question.
I mean, I suppose it's possible to like sex without liking women. Well, in fact, I suppose in theory it must be possible. But if you see I'm identifying something essentially plausible or potentially horrible, what I mean to say is this. When I say religion is man-made, in other words, it shows every sign of being produced by a primate species that's half a chromosome away from chimpanzee, I don't just mean man-made in that sense. I mean male-made. It's very noticeable, especially of the monotheisms, that they are run by and for men and founded by and for men. The Jewish prayer, I don't have to tell you, used to begin, the Orthodox one still does, thank God for not making me a Jew, a Gentile or a woman. I don't need to labor to you what the Quran says about the place of women in religion. And the disabilities laid upon women by Christianity are, again, too numerous to mention. It's too obvious that the repression of the female is a principle of monotheism for it to be overlooked. Doesn't mean that pleasure can't come from repression. Some people say it can. Try anything once. But I think it's an unhealthy thing, surely. And isn't it rather noticeable that in debates even in this city on, for example, the rights of homosexuals, that Orthodox Jewry at least seems to take it as a particularly strong responsibility to oppose any manifestation of gay life. I don't know why that should be, or what its scriptural authority for that is. I suppose it's probably Leviticus, as with Christianity.
Well,
it's something you can't not notice if you're interested in the subject.
I'm an Orthodox rabbi. This morning I was on Rosie O'Donnell's radio show, organized by Terry Caden, who was
That's
one of
going
the
too far.
Well, you know why atheists are to be pitied, don't you? They have no one to talk to when receiving a blowjob. So that if I'm asked, do I wish that religion would die out of the world, I sort of reply, no, I wouldn't have anyone to argue with. I mean, it is, after all, it is the original argument. Where religion ends, philosophy begins, just as where phony cosmological myths end, physics begins. So you have to know what the origins of the argument are. And religion is our first and worst attempt to find out what's going on. We only bother with it because it was here first. It grabbed the territory of explanation because we are pattern-seeking mammals. We need to look for patterns and for logic, and we prefer, even in times like this, many people will prefer a conspiracy explanation to no theory at all because they need to have some explanation. Well, religion comes from the time when we didn't know there was a germ theory to explain disease. So it was plague, it was God's will and a curse. Didn't know we lived on a round planet. Didn't know there were round celestial bodies. Didn't know that our DNA makes us kin with other animals and indeed plants. So the study of it and the debate with it, I think, has to go on. To that extent, I'm in favor of, as the president ludicrously says, teaching the argument about evolution. Because the way I learned it was by reading about the confrontation between Huxley and Wilberforce in London about the origin of species. Actually, it was in Oxford, in the origin of species. Huxley was Wilberforce's opponent. Wilberforce was the Bishop of Oxford. Huxley was Darwin's best friend, the man who coined the term agnostic. They had a great debate, and Huxley mopped the floor with the spokesman of the church. That's how I know how the argument goes. And in America, admittedly, 50 years later, good grief, but still, the same argument happens in Tennessee, in a courtroom this time. And again, they lose. By all means, teach the argument in that way. You just can't teach it in science class. And by the way, if there's going to be equal time for this stuff, then every church that gets any subsidy from the Faith-Based Initiative or any tax break has to teach evolution in Sunday school. There is something, to me at any rate, I'll simply have to state it, masochistic about Christianity. It wallows in guilt. It believes its adherents to be guilty from before they were born of original sin. If someone despises it, it looks for the reason why that contempt might be justified. And it proposes the hideous, the disgusting, the contemptible, the revolting, the dangerous, the suicidal idea, which everyone in this room must teach themselves to repudiate, that we should love our enemies. This is an obscene conceit. Dr. Rowan Williams, who does the most perfect impersonation of a Welsh sheep I have ever seen, can go love his own f***ing enemies. I don't want him loving mine. I don't want him telling me that I must learn to adore the misunderstood Al-Qaeda sympathizer. I don't want him saying in the name of his contemptible Nazarene ideology that I must give up my freedom, that the rule of law in the country of my birth is over, that there's a separate law for people of a separate religion, that we are not all governed by the same courts, not all by the same understanding, that anyone with a different faith can claim a different jurisdiction. That is moral and political and cultural suicide, and not to call it Christian would be to miss the point.
This is the first time in history, it still is, because the Virginia Statute on Religious Freedom becomes the basis of the First Amendment to our Constitution. The first time ever that a country has announced itself to be secular, where the only mention of God in its Constitution, except for the very vague preamble, and all of religion, is showing how and where it must be and is limited in the public square. Only mentioned in order to be constrained, because they knew its horrible power. Have we been true then to this, which totally negates Johnson's view? Madison thought you shouldn't even have chaplains in the armed forces. Neither, by the way, do I, not at taxpayers' expense, nor opening the prayers of Congress or proceedings every day, flat out unconstitutional. We haven't been true to this document, but it's because of that, not of manifest destiny, that we've been spared religious war. Anyway, we weren't spared religious war. The missionaries went far and wide to convert the Indian tribes. The Indian tribes fought against each other as far away as Oregon, as Catholic and Protestant, egged on by different kinds of missionaries. It speeded the destruction of Native America. The American Civil War, one of the worst wars ever fought, was fought over whether Christianity could or could not justify the continuation of slavery, and was, by its great abolisher Lincoln, denounced as a war between two kinds of Christian. William McKinley, announcing American expansionism and imperialism in the invasion of the Philippines, said, "We sent our army and navy to the Philippines to Christianize the Filipinos," who he didn't know, or maybe he did, had been Catholic for 3 centuries. Well, it's an interesting question from a Protestant like McKinley. He may not have thought that they counted as Christian, or he may simply not have known that they're called the Philippines for a reason, that another bloody Christian imperial power had decided to name millions of people after one of its blood-stained Catholic kings. Comes to the same thing? No, not exactly. To say we're exempt from religious warfare in this country is nonsense. And then finally to join the First World War. The pious Christian Woodrow Wilson takes us into a war. Every contending party in Europe is led by its king emperor, who's head of his local church, from Russia to Britain, the most destructive war in human history, and the one that curtain raises fascism, Stalinism, and the era of the totalitarianism. No, let nobody say we've been exempt, but let it be understood that it is our right to be exempt from it. and that every time you hear a religious demagogue open his or her mouth, you have the right to say they're being anti-American, and that their right to do this is in conflict with the law, not always, but sometimes. Utah was told it couldn't be in the Union unless it gave up plural marriage and, what amounts to the same, incest and rape and trading of children, the selling of daughters to uncles, dirty old uncles as wives. That's what plural marriage really means, incest and rape. And it's still carried on with insufficient police attention in some parts of Utah and Nevada to this day, as the Reverend Jeffs can show you. No, we said to the Mormons, you're out of the Union and the army's coming if you want to practice this religion. Of course, certain things should be illegal, especially as they bear upon the child. Is there anyone in this hall who thinks that religion justifies the mutilation of a child's genitals? Is there? Good. Well, wouldn't you like a law that said that non-elective surgery on the private parts of a child should be enacted? Isn't it time? What a shunder, what a shame, what a disgrace that we still haven't got this far. We can't prevent, in the name of God, in the name of faith, genital mutilation in our country. And we complacently sit here as if religion was no threat to us. Huh? You see what a long job civilization has, taming faith and making it finally acceptable to the point where you and I can talk about it this way. But it took a long time. We've no right to forget what religion was like before its fangs were drawn, as I started by saying. Thank you.